So learning to code has been one of the most rewarding and fulfilling things that I've picked up just over 2 years ago now. And thinking back on this journey, there are a number of things that I'd wish that somebody would have taught me, especially towards the earlier stages, from having not written a single line of code all the way up to the point where I was quite good in programming in Python. And so I thought I'd create a YouTube video for those who are along a similar journey or the same journey, and introduce my top 5 steps on how you can get going from not knowing how to code or really knowing what coding is, all the way up to the point where you're coding with a particular language and you can do it quite well. So the first step is really around doing a bit of research to understand what you want to use coding for. Now, whether that's building websites, automating something, joining coding competitions, and the list is endless. So for those who are just starting out, I would highly encourage you to spend a bit of time to research what you can use coding for and then what you want to use coding for. So then step number 2 is to pick a programming language. So once you have a fair idea of what you want to use coding for, you will want to look into which coding language fits that criteria the best. Now, some of the more mainstream coding languages, including Python and Java, can pretty much do anything out there. But there are some advantages and disadvantages to using either. And it's because of this that you really want to have a fair idea of what you want to use coding for. So to help you along this decision-making process, I'll put up a graph on some of the more commonly used programming languages out there. And you'll see that Python and Java are towards the top. But as well as popularity, you really want to think about what they are used for. So if AI and machine learning and automation in this sense is something that you are very interested in, then I would recommend that you pick up Python, because most of the libraries and existing code that's out there is coded in Python. Whereas if you're more interested in web development, then JavaScript is the go-to language. Because if you want to develop websites, again, some of the most modern tools and applications to help you to code those websites are written in JavaScript. And then if you wanted app development, then Java would be your best bet. Because again, a lot of the apps out there, or a lot of the tools that are used to write those apps are written in Java. And so going back to my first step, it's very important that you have a fair idea of what you want to use coding for. And of course, if you haven't coded before, it can be quite tough to sort of know what you want to use it for. But as you start out coding, I would encourage you to have a good think about this, because it's better to make the switch earlier on than learning an entire programming language quite well to then realize that it's not very fit for what you want to use it for. So that's really my second step. So then once you've chosen a programming language to code in or to learn, you want a place where you can write your code, where you can take inputs, write some code to process these inputs and have outputs as the result. And a very useful place to run these is in an integrated development environment. And now it might sound a bit more complex than it is, but in short, it's an IDE. And it's simply a place where you can write your code, where you can run your code, and where you can get the output of that code. And so I would recommend JetBrains. They are a very good source for IDEs, and they do IDEs for a whole range of programming languages. Personally, I use PyCharm. I've used it for the last 2 years, and it's the IDE for Python. But Java, JavaScript, C++, C all have their own IDEs. So the first practical thing that you want to do is to find an IDE and install it. So that's step number 3. So then moving on to step number 4, and this one is more of a generic one. So once you've installed your IDE, you're ready to start programming or learning how to code. And so I would highly recommend that you buy a few beginner books to read through and code along with, which your IDE will help you to do. I would also, in this day and age where it's so common for people to make videos on teaching how to learn programming languages, there's so many good resources out there on YouTube. I would recommend that in whatever programming language you've chosen, just to watch a tutorial on it. And usually there are comprehensive tutorials on YouTube that takes you from the very beginning all the way up to what you need to know to be able to solve problems. And that really leads me to my 5th and final step, which I believe is perhaps the most important step of the 5. So once you've installed your IDE, once you've watched a number of YouTube videos on how to code and a number of the tutorials on some of the fundamentals of coding, you are ready to solve problems. And in my opinion, this lies in the heart of coding. And I don't believe anyone truly understands what coding involves until they start solving problems. So no matter what you decide to use coding for, to some extent it is solving problems, because you're learning how to put different things together. And so I would recommend that you find a coding problem website. I personally use Code Wars. I found it to be a very interactive and fun place to code, because you have different challenges from, well, different coding problems that are rated from 1 to 8, 1 being the hardest and 8 being sort of the easiest, testing you on the fundamentals of your coding language. And so choose a coding problem website like Code Wars and just start solving problems. And the more problems you solve, the more you will understand your language and what its capabilities are. Then from there, it kind of goes full circle, where you go back to step number 1, where you've thought about what you want to use coding for. And then since at this point you have a fairly good understanding of how to code, you can then go deeper and do more research into the specific field that you're interested in. But the important thing is to follow these 5 steps, and you will get to where you want to in the quickest time possible. So for those of you who might want some recommendations on which books or videos to watch, I will leave a link in the description on some of the more useful tutorials that I've come across, whether it's in Java, in Python, and in some of the other coding languages. And I'll also link some books which you can very easily buy from Amazon that I've personally gone through and found very useful when learning how to code in Python. So those are my top 5 steps on how to get started with coding. And I mentioned towards the start of the video that these are some of the things that I'd wish that I'd known, but very fortunate for me, I chose Python, which is one of the more popular programming languages. And I personally enjoy solving problems, and I've entered many coding competitions, and you can use any language you want in those. But I do believe that it's important you give some serious thought into what you want to use coding for, because there are just so many things out there, and you can very easily find yourself digging through a rabbit hole, not really knowing where you want to take sort of your coding journey. So that's very important. So that brings me towards the end of this video. I hope that you've all found it very useful, and if you could like and subscribe, that would help massively in terms of growing this channel. With that being said, I'll catch you guys at the next one, and if you do have any suggestions on what you want me to make videos on, do let me know in the comments and I will take it under consideration. Until next time.